As part of our 2A history project, here is a blast from the past.
All right. Okay, well, we're getting still. Our base there is a little wobbly, so. Okay, we're getting still. Okay, good. All right, edit. 3, 2, 1. Ladies and gentlemen, here we are in the Springfield Armory building here in Springfield, Massachusetts, with a lovely lady named Joanne Ganji. Did I say that right?
You did.
Well, Joanne, just walking around, this is a place of tremendous historical significance. And plus, right now you have the Royal Armorers exhibit
That's
from,
right.
now where
London.
are they? From London. And we'll be showing some things later on, but how long is that going to be here in the...
We are trying to confirm that right now, but as best we know, it will be here through October.
So several months when we're doing this, yes.
That's right.
Well, tell me something, Joanne. Tell us what your museum here represents.
Okay, first off, it is a National Historic Site, part of the National Park Service, one of 368 sites across the United States. And as you say, the reason it's put aside is because of its historic significance to the nation, the development of the country. And its primary role, as you can figure out from walking around, was to manufacture military arms, shoulder arms, from 1794 to 1968.
Now, I see some national match, 1911, so
right.
Also some handguns were built here.
And also to recognize that the Army was involved with the Olympics at the turn of the century. I don't know if you're aware of that.
No, I really didn't know that. No.
And 1994 is our bicentennial year. And we will be having a bicentennial here on our site that we will have reenactments set up outside. There will not be any firing or shooting, but we will have tents set up, and we will have the periods represented showing the arms that were made here at Springfield Armory and their use through time.
Well,
from the Revolution through the Persian Gulf. Yep.
Well, who set up Springfield Armory? Was there an arms factory here during our own Revolutionary War?
George Washington set up two national federal armories. One was here in Springfield in the north, and then we had one in Harpers Ferry, Virginia, which was destroyed in 1862 by Union troops during the Civil War, thus leaving us as the primary federal armory for the nation. And that happened because during the Revolutionary War, we had been very dependent on France and other countries for our arms. And so in 1793, President Washington made the decision that we should have a way of having our own arms made here in this country to safeguard our own and make sure.
Here? Now, obviously,
the very first one was the smooth-bore flintlock, based on the Charleville model from France. And then the last being the M14 with the shoulder arms and the M60 machine gun. And there was an awful lot of research and development and other kinds of work going on here.
Was gunpowder made on this site?
No. You're thinking about, I think, before the armory was operating as a national armory, it was a storage facility for several years where we had munitions stored near here in buildings that the government owned. And that was part of the reason they chose Springfield, because they already had an established site through the government.
Right. Of course, in those days, you would not want to put gunpowder around your manufacturing facility because occasionally those magazines of powder did blow up.
That's right, yeah. But our role was the manufacture of the shoulder arms.
From the beginning, do you have a reasonable guesstimate of how many firearms were made here over a cumulative total?
No, but I can give you just one figure in terms of the M1 semi-automatic rifle. Through contracts as well as what was manufactured here, 6.5 million M1s were made. That's just one firearm, so that gives you an idea. During the Civil War, we had about 3,400 people working here. During the Second World War, we had 14,000 people working here. And during the Civil War, they were manufacturing about 1,000 guns a day.
That is fantastic. And of course, during the Civil War period, you didn't have all these modern machines. That was that was handwork, wasn't it?
Right, and now in the building we're in now, remember, is the main arsenal. I don't know if you noticed the dioramas over here, but it shows you the layout. This was a very, very large site. We're only in one building of what was
the original
large complex.
Now, the Springfield Armory closed in 1968. Is that correct? All right. Now, friends, trust me on this one. Of course, we have a lot of people who watch our program, a lot of viewers in this area, in Massachusetts, in the Northeast. But if you're making a trip up near here, this is one of those stops that if you're a patriotic American, if you have any interest at all in firearms, this is one to come to.
Yes, and I also want to stress to people, too, they have families or friends who just think they're coming to a gun museum, that this is much more than a gun museum. You're also going to learn about technology, you're going to learn about the role of women, you'll learn about inventions and inventors that transformed industry in this country. We're talking about mass production, interchangeability of parts, Thomas Blanchard's eccentric lathe. Those are the kind of the stories behind what you're looking at in the cases that interest, let's say, other people too who may be with the member of the family who wants to come up and see the firearms.
Oh, I think that from this display, and of course they're always going to have, you're going to have some guest exhibit from some other source. And
matter of fact, Smith & Wesson will be having an exhibit here later on in our bicentennial year. Our bicentennial goes through October, and in June we'll be setting up the Artistry in Arms exhibit that's been going nationwide.
We've had, those of you who've seen that on this program know what a terrific exhibit it is. And of course, it's going to be here when now?
It'll be coming in June.
Oh, in June. So,
next month.
Oh, look, that's reason enough to come. And of course, when you do come, this has got to be one of the prettiest places in the United States. The entire area here is so pretty. These people are very courteous. They're very nice, and they want you to come and see your heritage.
That's right.
And what days and hours are you open?
Well, actually, beginning on Memorial Day, we'll be open 7 days a week.
7 days a week.
Yeah, 10 to 5. There's no admission at this point, just by donation. And as of Labor Day, we will be closed on Mondays. So they have a good long time between now and then. We're open Tuesday through Sunday. So we're always open either 6 or 7 days, 10 to 5.
Well, Joanne, we really appreciate you letting us come in. We're going to take some pictures of several things. Friends, we just don't have enough, we don't have enough time to photograph all the fabulous things here, but we're going to give you some high spots and let you know some of the things here anyway. So just hold on just a minute, and we're going to start walking around the museum.
Well, Johnny, we're here at the Springfield Armory Museum, and here's a demonstration of the national match weapons that they have had something to do with, starting back with the old Krags and then getting up to the 03 A1, the very rare 1922 M1 22 caliber rifle, which has always carried a premium. There's the M1 Duran that George Patton referred to as the finest military weapon that had ever been devised. The M14, which was the last rifle that was in production here. And, of course, the pistol, the 1911 A1 National Match weapon. That's a very fine pistol, and one that has won a lot of awards. It's probably the finest competition pistol that's ever been made.
Three, two, one.
Well, you know, the Harper's Ferry was one of the government arsenals and production facilities. It was the one that John Brown raided and was overcome by forces under the command of Colonel Robert E. Lee. John Brown expected the slaves in the South to rise and support him, and he had control of an armory, and it didn't last very long. He was eventually hung.
Well, now, correct me if I'm wrong, but the Harper's Ferry arsenal was destroyed by Union soldiers to keep it from falling in the hands of the South.
John, you got me on that one. I'm not sure. I know there was a lot of fighting in the Civil War of the federal armories here. And included in that, I believe, if I look carefully enough, I'll find the 03A1 and the 03A3. Weapons that were used in World War I, of course, back to the Duran, used in World War II, and the M14 that saw us beginning in the war in Vietnam, and of course it served in Korea. And then the war in Vietnam was partly fought with it and finally developed into the Colt M16, the military version of the AR-15.
This is a Krag on the bottom, isn't it? 3040 Krag?
That's correct.
Of course, all the, as we were talking earlier, I believe that just production of the M1 Duran was around, what, 6.5 million, just that one rifle?
A little over 6 million. That was, I think, primarily during World War II. I don't think it was produced after that. Here,
2, 1.
we have a demonstration here of the depth of penetration. And remember, this is a U.S. trapdoor rifle of 1873, 45-70 caliber. And we showed what its penetration was in a block of hardwood, which is not very great. It was 3.5 inches cross grain in seasoned oak. Then they went to the Krag Jorgensen 30-40 caliber at a distance of 25 feet, and in the same cross grain seasoned oak, it had a penetration of 19.5 inches. That's at a velocity of about just under 2,500 feet per second. Now we moved over to the more modern rifles, the M14 test record block, and it is surprising just exactly how much penetration that is. This is a block of seasoned oak cross grain, and we find penetration, and here's the bullet here. That looks like it's about 27, 28 inches, 27.5 inches it says, cross grain and seasoned oak. And then down here we have the 03 30-06 rifle. It was used extensively in World War I. Of course, the Krag Jorgensen was too. And there they had a penetration of a little over 27 inches in seasoned oak cross grain. That's a lot of penetration. John, you're going to have to narrate this one.
A República de Colombia y ese tremendo tema. Tabaco y ron, qué rico, más música, buenas tardes.
Yeah. I mean, of course, some of that's going to be we need to go, let's go over and do this on Erskine Allen, back over here, and wherever it is. Well, not Allen, Erskine. Let's get this right here in the read us what this is. That's the deck clearing gun. All 7 at one time. Hold up.
In front of us, a Flintlock Volley Gun. It has 7 barrels and apparently was all fired at one time. There were 655 of those guns produced, and it was produced for naval service. It was called a deck clearing gun, and I rather imagine it cleared a deck of a warship pretty fast.
And then, of course, look at the double barrel Flintlock pistol with the shoulder stock, the additional stock there. And that's a most impressive piece.
Yes, and ATF wouldn't like that today either.
Here's the exhibit on Erskine Allen, on the individual who invented the 1873 Springfield. This is one of his patent models. This is the wooden model he made up for patent.
And there are several other things here on some of his carvings. And his original patent drawings for the 1873 Springfield trapdoor.
All right, here we have an exhibit featuring John C. Duran, who was the inventor of the famed M1 rifle
Las 3:53
that was used
minutos de la
in
tarde
World War
encontramos
II so
más
much.
música y Nino Segarra. Y probemos.
His firearms designing genius probably ranks close to Browning's.
Esa sonrisa de oreja a oreja, me la deja ver. Eso es pasta.
He had
Más música, buenas tardes.
developed this rifle, and in 1927 the Army had decided to do something in connection with a smaller caliber, .27 6 caliber rifle. But in 1932, when he was Chief of Staff, Douglas MacArthur decided the Army ought to stay with a larger 30 caliber cartridge, and that was the forerunner of what happened and the production that was done in World War II. 6.5 million M1 Durans. Incidentally, a lot of those have been released to the civilian market. There are a lot more that the government has ridiculously destroyed. Well, since we're here, we have here the David Lytle, what they call the deck cannon. It was a life-saving device designed to shoot a projectile with some sort of rescue device on it from the deck of a gun, or deck of a ship, or even from shore. Rather formidable weapon. Looks like it has a bore of about 2 inches.
And that rope, they could rescue sailors or even tow entire ships with lines that were sent out. I think this device is credited with saving about 4,500 lives over its period of use.
Well, of course, Johnny, that's something that the present gun control addicts haven't given credit to the possession of weapons in the hands of the civilian population. They talk about how many deaths there are every year as a result of the use of guns, from only perhaps less than 1% of the guns that are in existence, and yet there are 2,400,000 crimes that are prevented each year because the potential victim was armed. Well, now this is an example of the type of tools that were used in the manufacturing processes here at the Springfield Armory. Their principal source of power was water power, and the water-turned wheels or paddles, like the paddles on a steamship, and that in turn turned gears, and the gears in turn worked these belts and powered the machines. And this was all done through water power without any necessity of converting anything to either electricity or steam. Of course, this was before the time of electricity. It was developed by a Mexican general, and it was one of the first semi-automatic weapons that was used and adopted by any nation. It was devised in 1891. Over 100 years ago. The Germans used it in their aircraft to begin in World War I, carried by their aerial observers. They tried to use it some in the trench warfare, but it wouldn't stand up to use in the muddy trenches of France and Belgium.
You know, Judge, that's a good point. We've been saying that semi-automatic rifles have been around this is over 100 years.
That's why I said it, from 1891, that this is not exactly new technology, despite the fact that the present national administration seems to think that it's an advanced technological invention.
Hit 3, 2, 4. Reflections killing. Okay. Hit 3, 2, 1.
Well, here we have a display of mishaps that have happened with rifles. You notice the one on the top has got an S-curve, a compound S-curve in it. That was a rifle that was being carried by a sentry on a rainy night, and a lightning bolt struck it, and that's what it did to it. Incidentally, it didn't hurt the sentry, strangely enough. Below that we have some other examples of damage, either from multiple loads in a rifle where it caused the end to explode, or muskrats chewing on rifle stocks, or down here some stocks, some barrels that were actually hit by bullets and pretty much put out of action. Carrying a good hacksaw along might have helped there. Well, here we have a display of a whole bunch of unissued musket rifles that were, I guess, left over at the end of the war between the states, and they're beautifully done and in perfect condition. I don't know how they've been preserved that well. I don't know how many of them there are in there. They are 3 deep on one side and 2 deep on the other. It looks like there must be several hundred at least.
Last time we was down at the store about years ago, that's a store that literally,
I think that's a slide back.
more than like this, what they call 3, 2, 1.
Well, here we have a display of plains rifles, as they are called. This group of rifles were confiscated from Indians. Of course, the Indians were quick to realize that rifles were superior to bow and arrows, and they were quick to adopt rifles as soon as they could get their hands on them, either through purchase or trading or by picking them up from battlefields.
4, 3, 2, 1.
This is a display that's very interesting because it illustrates the necessity of developing breech loaders, not only for the purpose of increased firepower, but for the danger to the man that was carrying it, because the standard issue weapon in the war between the states was a .58 caliber rifle musket. It was loaded by, not breech loading, what do you call it, Johnny?
A muzzle loader.
Muzzle loader, right, a muzzle loader. I'm not much on muzzle loaders. And at the Battle of Gettysburg, after the battle was over, it picked up 27,574 of these weapons from the battlefield, and some 6,000 were found to be properly loaded. 12,000 had anywhere from 3 to 10 loads in them, and one piece contained as many as 23 loads. That must have just about filled the whole barrel up. Now, the display says that from these figures it was estimated that 1/3 of the fighting men on each side were carrying non-functioning weapons. It sounds to me more like about 2/3 of the people were carrying non-functioning weapons. That tallies, incidentally, with modern battle statistics, because the number of soldiers that carry weapons in the battle have been variously estimated at rather high percentages who never fire their weapons. Picture of me.
In the evolution of the percussion gun up through different types of repeating rifles, the Winchester, the M1 carbine, and the 1927 A1 Thompson. Now, friends, what we're seeing is a very old wheel lock here, and we have a display here showing the evolution of different types of handguns. And of course, it goes on through the Flintlock and the percussion here. Then we have the Colt and Remington type percussion revolvers, and I believe that is Remington. Yes, it is. Then we have the Smith & Wesson type number 2, which is an under-breaking little revolver, and then it has the semi-automatic. This is a Luger type pistol with a snail drum magazine. And you know, friends, it's a 32 shot magazine, and this gun has been around since
Oh, my goodness, the early 1893. Of course, here is your bore chart automatic, which dates from 1893, in fact. So the Luger, I think, is a little bit, it's a 1908 gun, but a semi-automatic handgun that a bore chart automatic has been around since 1893. And why in the world these knuckleheads want to take them away today is beyond me. Edit 3, 2, 1. And friends, we're looking here at a handgun exhibit. This is a Liberator pistol. It's in .45 caliber, and it's a little bigger as compared. Here's an experimental Colt, and here's our regular 1911 we're so familiar with. So this gives you an idea of the size of the Liberator. A single shot .45 ACP made of stampings, and our own government made about 1 million of these guns, and they dropped them by air. They gave them to people, literally the insurgents in World War II. And the idea was that the insurgent or the partisans would fight against the Japanese or the Nazi forces, and they would use their one bullet. Now, I talk about your Barney Fife gun, one bullet, and they would hopefully take some action on a sentry or on an individual trooper and then get his weapon because they only had one bullet.
It was the only guns having been made, Johnny, that took less time to make it than it did to load it and fire it.
Now then, friends, looking, we have a Kalashnikov, also some experimental guns. This was a needle-firing gun. Experimental guns here at Springfield Armory, and of course we wind up with the M16 or AR-15 series. Now then, friends, this rifle on the top is a double-barreled rifle. If I can get up there, you can see it. Instead of one barrel, there are in fact two, and this has two magazines. It was a multiple, what they called a salvo rifle, experimental. The next gun is an AR-10, and then, of course, the familiar AR-15/16, different development parts or units of those guns. And, of course, these are different development examples of what wound up being types of M14s, a number of different experimental pieces here on display. Most interesting. Edit 3, 2, 1. Well, friends, here's another example of some of the final products made at the Springfield Armory here in Massachusetts. And as we said, it was deactivated in 1968. And of course, the commercial name went on to the Springfield Armory firm, which was a private concern, primarily selling Springfield handguns and M1A rifles, which is very similar to the M14. But this is a most impressive array here. You have the Browning .50 caliber machine gun, modifications, and finally down the bottom the M60, which has an interesting, colorful history behind it. Here's a display case, weapons from World War II, the Garand, M1 carbine, the BAR, a M3 grease gun, the 1911, and finally on the bottom the Johnson semi-automatic rifle, and a dented World War II helmet. I imagine the individual who wore this helmet had a fairly severe headache after that dent. 3, 2, 1.
We have a group of trench devices here. This was a unique application in World War I of trench warfare. And it was dangerous to stick your head above a trench. You probably got shot. So what they did, they stuck rifles above the trenches, and these rifles had quite a conglomeration of devices, including a periscope, so that you could remain down in the trench and yet fire the rifle at anybody approaching. And there are 3 different versions of these things. The most complex one looks like the one at the top, but we have other devices where soldiers could keep their bodies and their heads below level and still fire a weapon over the battlefield.
3, 2, 1.
Well, here's a display of a device known as a Peterson device. It was a device that was inserted into the receiver of a modified 1903 bolt-action rifle, and it gave the rifle the capability of firing 40 pistol-sized 30-caliber bullets in a semi-automatic mode. We've heard a lot about Peterson devices. It's the first one that we've ever seen, and it's quite a nice display.
And of course, what we have here is components of how to make a drawn cartridge case all the way across the board. Now, the case starts as a brass washer type thing, so a brass disc, and then it goes all the way across where it's drawn and pulled out into a full-size cartridge case. Now then, friends, we're looking at one of the very earliest firearms, and of course, essentially that wooden pole is the stock. This dates from the 1400s, from the 1300s, the late 14th century. And here was the portion that was the gun. It had a little touch hole here in the end that was struck with a match. You can see the hole there back on the end, and that was the gun. They put a ball or some rocks or whatever they had handy in that thing. One of the earliest guns. And of course, what we have here is a couple of cased percussion Colts. And this is one of the most significant guns, one of the most important guns. I personally think it was a Walker Colt. This is, of course, an original. And believe it or not, the power of this black powder revolver was not generally eclipsed until the invention of the .357 Magnum in 1935. So this Walker Colt dates from 1847. And of course, they are just nearly priceless today. Just a fabulous collection of guns here. A lot of other things besides guns, though, that anyone who likes historical things would enjoy this museum. Edit. 3, 2, 1.
This is Mr. Dick Garand, John Garand's son. We're pleased to have visiting the museum today. He'll be here June 6th for a D-Day celebration where his dad is having the Garand Association dedicate a bust in honor of his father and his contribution to the nation with the M1 semi-automatic rifle.
Well, sir, it's very nice to meet you. We appreciate you taking time to speak with us. And some shots at Springfield Armory, the flag at half-mast because of Richard Nixon's death. And of course, the gigantic old clock. A real pretty building here in Springfield, Massachusetts. Edit. My friends, I'll tell you what, this has got to be one of the prettiest places. When you see how pretty New England is, you can really understand why our forefathers were so convinced that they needed to protect and defend this country. This has got to be one of the prettiest countrysides, even today in 1994. The weather here is, of course we're not talking wintertime, we're talking spring and early summer, but the weather here is wonderful.
So let us know what you think. We'll be watching the comments wherever you find the video, over on gunstreamer.com or on guntube.org. Thank you for supporting our projects. If you'd like to buy us a cup of coffee, check out our Patreon channel.
The guys and gals of gunwebsites.com encourages you to take a CCW class every year, practice at least once a month, and carry every day. Thank you for watching gunwebsites.com.